November 1943, Solomon Islands, South Pacific. A Japanese destroyer cut through the darkness at 30 knots, its wake glowing with bioluminescent plankton that traced a phosphorescent path across the black water. The crew aboard the Yamakaze felt secure in the embrace of night. For 2 years, Japanese naval forces had owned these hours, using darkness as both shield and weapon. Their lookouts were trained to spot the silhouettes of enemy vessels against the starlit horizon. Their commanders had developed tactics that exploited the confusion and chaos of night engagements where visual identification was nearly impossible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Americans, the Japanese believed, were blind after sunset. Their radar systems were primitive, useful perhaps for navigation but useless for the precision work of naval combat. American ships equipped with these electronic devices had proven easy prey in night actions. The Battle of Savo Island in August 1942 had demonstrated this decisively. Japanese cruisers and destroyers had savaged an American task force, sinking 4 heavy cruisers in a single night engagement. The Americans had radar. It hadn't saved them. But on this particular night, something had changed. High above the Yamakaze, invisible in the darkness at 8,000 feet, a modified PBY Catalina flying boat circled in a slow, patient orbit. The aircraft bore unusual markings, its entire fuselage painted matte black, even the national insignia subdued to prevent reflection. Inside the cramped fuselage, a radar operator watched a green circular screen where a bright pip glowed with unmistakable clarity. The Japanese destroyer was perfectly visible to him, its position, course, and speed all displayed with mechanical precision. The pilot spoke quietly into his radio, vectoring friendly forces toward the unsuspecting target. Below, an American destroyer division altered course, guided by coordinates transmitted from the circling aircraft. They would intercept the Yamakaze in 12 minutes. The Japanese would never see them coming. This aircraft belonged to a unit the Navy had designated Fleet Air Wing 4, but everyone who knew about them used a different name. They called them the Black Cats. This is the story of how American innovation in radar technology transformed night combat in the Pacific, turning Japanese tactical superiority into a death sentence and hunting enemy vessels through darkness they had once considered impenetrable. To understand the Black Cat program and the revolutionary radar systems that made it possible, we must first understand the problem American forces faced in the Pacific night. When war erupted in December 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy possessed one of the most formidable surface fleets in the world. Their ships were modern, their crews extensively trained, and their tactical doctrine sophisticated. But their greatest advantage in the early war years wasn't technological superiority in the conventional sense. It was their mastery of night combat. Japanese naval officers had spent decades perfecting the art of fighting in darkness. Their training programs emphasized night vision adaptation, requiring officers and lookouts to spend hours in darkened rooms preparing their eyes for combat conditions. They developed optical equipment, including extremely high-quality binoculars and specialized night glasses that maximized the human eye's ability to detect targets in low-light conditions. Their ships were equipped with large, powerful searchlights that could be used to momentarily illuminate targets once contact was made. More importantly, they had developed tactics and weapons systems optimized for night engagements. The Type 93 torpedo, which Americans would come to call the Long Lance, was perhaps the most devastating naval weapon of the early war. These oxygen-fueled torpedoes had tremendous range, up to 40,000 yards at moderate speed settings, and carried massive warheads. Japanese destroyers could launch these weapons from positions well outside the effective range of American guns and radar, then withdraw before their presence was even detected. The Japanese tactical approach to night combat was aggressive and well-rehearsed. Destroyer divisions would sweep ahead of the main force, searching for enemy vessels. Once contact was made, they would close rapidly, launch torpedoes, and then either withdraw or press the attack with gunfire if circumstances permitted. Their ships were fast, their crews disciplined, and their willingness to engage in close-quarters combat at night gave them a psychological edge that American forces struggled to counter. American naval forces, by contrast, were poorly prepared for night surface actions. United States Navy doctrine had traditionally emphasized daylight gunnery, using the superior fire control systems and optical rangefinders that American ships possessed. The concept of deliberately seeking combat in darkness seemed unnecessarily risky when American forces could leverage their technological advantages in daylight conditions. This doctrinal preference meant that American crews received minimal training in night combat techniques. When war came, they were suddenly facing an enemy who had spent years preparing for exactly these conditions. The results were catastrophic. The Battle of Savo Island on August 9, 1942, remains one of the worst defeats in United States naval history. A Japanese force of 7 cruisers and 1 destroyer surprised an Allied force guarding the approaches to Guadalcanal. In less than an hour of chaotic night fighting, the Japanese sank 4 heavy cruisers and damaged 2 others, killing over 1,000 sailors. The Japanese force withdrew with minimal damage. The Americans had possessed radar. Several ships in the Allied force were equipped with early warning systems that should have detected the approaching Japanese vessels. But the radar operators were inexperienced, the technology was primitive, and coordination between ships was poor. The radar had detected the Japanese force, but the information was misinterpreted or not acted upon quickly enough. This pattern repeated itself throughout 1942 and into 1943. At Cape Esperance in October 1942, American forces achieved a tactical victory, but only through superior numbers and favorable circumstances. At the First Naval Battle of Guadalcanal in November, American ships took devastating losses in night actions. At Tassafaranga in November 1942, a Japanese destroyer force armed primarily with torpedoes devastated an American cruiser force, sinking 1 heavy cruiser and damaging 3 others while losing only 1 destroyer. The message was clear. American forces could not compete with Japanese night fighting capabilities using existing tactics and technology. Something had to change. The United States Navy had been developing radar technology throughout the late 1930s and early war years. By 1942, several types of search and fire control radar were in service. The CXAM radar had been installed on major warships starting in 1940. The SG surface search radar, introduced in 1941, provided better resolution and range for detecting surface targets. The more advanced SC and SK air search radars could detect aircraft at considerable distances. But these early radar systems had significant limitations. Their resolution was poor, making it difficult to distinguish between multiple targets or to accurately determine target bearing and range. They were temperamental, requiring constant maintenance and adjustment. The displays were difficult to interpret, showing targets as vague blips on a cathode ray tube screen. Most critically, the radar equipment was large and heavy, suitable for installation on cruisers and battleships but too bulky for smaller vessels or aircraft. For aircraft operations, the limitations were even more severe. The existing airborne radar systems were designed primarily for anti-submarine work. The ASV radar used by patrol aircraft could detect surfaced submarines, but its resolution and reliability were questionable. The equipment was heavy, reducing aircraft performance and range. The displays were crude, requiring skilled interpretation. And the systems were susceptible to interference from sea clutter, the radar returns from waves and surface disturbances that could mask legitimate targets. What the Navy needed was a radar system that could be carried by patrol aircraft, operate reliably in the tropical conditions of the Pacific Theater, detect surface vessels at long range with sufficient accuracy to guide attacks, and provide precise enough information to vector friendly surface forces onto enemy positions. In early 1943, such a system didn't exist. The development of improved airborne radar had been underway since before the war, but progress was slow. Multiple technical challenges had to be solved simultaneously. The radar needed sufficient power to detect targets at useful ranges, but the power requirements couldn't exceed what aircraft electrical systems could provide. The antenna systems needed to be aerodynamically acceptable while still providing adequate coverage and resolution. The display systems needed to be clear enough for operators to interpret quickly and accurately.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
In the cramped, vibrating environment of an aircraft in flight. Engineers at the Naval Research Laboratory and at the Radiation Laboratory at MIT had been working on these problems. By mid-1943, they had developed a new system designated the ASE radar. This was a centimetric radar, operating at much higher frequencies than previous systems, which provided dramatically improved resolution. The higher frequency allowed for smaller antenna systems, reducing weight and aerodynamic drag. The improved resolution meant that targets appeared as distinct, clear returns on the display rather than vague blips. The ASE radar represented a quantum leap in capability. In testing, it demonstrated the ability to detect surface vessels at ranges exceeding 30 miles in good conditions. More importantly, it could provide accurate bearing and range information, allowing operators to guide aircraft or surface vessels onto targets with unprecedented precision. The system could distinguish between multiple targets in close proximity, something earlier radars struggled with. It could even provide some indication of target size, helping operators determine whether they were tracking a destroyer, cruiser, or merchant vessel. But having the technology was only half the solution. The Navy needed a platform to carry it and a tactical concept for employing it effectively. This is where the Black Cat program was born. The consolidated PBY Catalina was already one of the most versatile aircraft in the American arsenal. These large, twin-engine flying boats had been in service since the late 1930s. They were slow, with a maximum speed of only about 180 miles per hour, and they were vulnerable to fighter attack. But they had tremendous endurance, capable of remaining airborne for over 24 hours on long-range patrol missions. Their spacious fuselages could accommodate bulky equipment and multiple crew members. And they could operate from water, allowing them to base at forward locations where conventional runways weren't available. Someone, the historical record isn't entirely clear who deserves credit, recognized that the PBY's limitations for daylight operations could become advantages at night. The aircraft was slow, but enemy fighters were blind in darkness. It was large, but that meant plenty of room for radar equipment and operators. It had long endurance, perfect for extended night patrols over contested waters. If equipped with the new ASE radar and modified for night operations, a PBY could become a lethal nocturnal hunter. The modifications were extensive. The entire aircraft was painted matte black, eliminating any reflective surfaces that might betray its presence. Even the roundels and identification markings were toned down, rendered in dark gray rather than the standard bright colors. Exhaust flame dampeners were installed to hide the bright glow from the engines that would otherwise be visible for miles. All interior lighting was changed to red to preserve the crew's night vision. Unnecessary equipment was stripped out to save weight and make room for the radar installation. The ASE radar itself was mounted in a streamlined housing under the fuselage. The radar operator's station was positioned where he could monitor the display and communicate easily with the pilot and navigator. Additional radio equipment was installed to allow the aircraft to coordinate with friendly surface forces, transmitting precise targeting information. Some aircraft were fitted with small bombs or depth charges, allowing them to conduct attacks themselves if opportunities arose. Others focused purely on reconnaissance and coordination, serving as airborne command posts directing surface forces onto targets. The crews selected for these modified aircraft were volunteers, men willing to fly long, tedious patrols through tropical nights with the constant risk of enemy interception or mechanical failure far from friendly bases. They needed pilots with exceptional instrument flying skills, navigators who could dead reckon accurately over featureless ocean, and radar operators who could interpret the green glow of the display screen with split-second precision. The training program was intensive. Pilots practiced low-altitude flight in complete darkness, learning to trust their instruments when visual references disappeared. Radar operators spent hours studying the signatures of different vessel types, learning to distinguish destroyers from cruisers, cargo ships from tankers, by the size and shape of the radar returns. Radio operators drilled on communication protocols, developing the ability to transmit precise coordinates and targeting data quickly and clearly even under stress. Navigation was perhaps the most critical skill. These aircraft would be operating hundreds of miles from base, over water, at night, often in radio silence to avoid detection. Navigators used celestial navigation when stars were visible, dead reckoning when they weren't, and the radar itself to identify known landmarks and check positions. A navigation error of even a few degrees could mean the difference between finding a target and returning to base with nothing to show for hours of flying. By late summer 1943, the first Black Cat units were operational. They deployed to forward bases throughout the Solomon Islands, New Guinea, and other contested areas of the South Pacific. Their mission was straightforward in concept but difficult in execution. They would patrol assigned sectors during the hours of darkness, using their radar to detect enemy surface vessels. Once a target was located, they would shadow it, tracking its movements and reporting position, course, and speed. If friendly surface forces were available, the Black Cats would vector them onto the target, providing continuous updates until contact was made. If no friendly forces were in position, the Black Cats could conduct attacks themselves using bombs or, in some cases, torpedoes. The Japanese had no idea what was coming. Their first encounters with Black Cat-equipped aircraft seemed like unfortunate coincidences. A destroyer on a resupply run would suddenly find itself under attack by an aircraft that appeared out of nowhere. A transport convoy would be intercepted by American surface forces that somehow knew exactly where to find them despite the darkness. Initial Japanese reports attributed these incidents to bad luck or exceptional American seamanship. But the pattern continued. Again and again, Japanese vessels operating under cover of darkness found themselves detected, tracked, and attacked. The Americans seem to have developed an uncanny ability to find ships in conditions where visual detection should have been impossible. Japanese commanders began to suspect that the Americans had developed some new capability, but they struggled to understand what it might be. The first major demonstration of Black Cat effectiveness came in the Central Solomons in late 1943. Japanese forces were conducting a complex series of resupply operations, using fast destroyer runs to move troops and supplies to isolated garrisons. These Tokyo Express runs, as the Americans called them, had been a thorn in the side of Allied operations for over a year. The Japanese destroyers would load supplies and troops at Rabaul or other northern bases, race south at high speed under cover of darkness, deliver their cargo, and withdraw before dawn brought the threat of American air attack. On the night of November 2, 1943, a formation of 5 Japanese destroyers departed Rabaul bound for Buka Island. The force was commanded by an experienced captain who had conducted dozens of similar runs. Weather conditions were favorable, dark but not stormy, with scattered clouds that would help conceal the destroyers from any patrolling aircraft. The force maintained strict radio silence and pushed their ships to maximum speed, standard procedures designed to minimize the chance of detection. What the Japanese commander didn't know was that a Black Cat from Fleet Air Wing 4 had taken off from Munda Airfield 3 hours earlier. The PBY was conducting a routine patrol along a sector that intelligence analysis suggested might see enemy activity. The radar operator, a young enlisted man from Ohio who had been with the program since its inception, swept his sector methodically, checking each arc of ocean for the telltale return that would indicate a surface contact. At 2,140 hours, he detected multiple targets at a range of 32 miles. The returns were sharp and distinct, clearly showing 5 separate vessels moving in formation at high speed. He reported the contact to the pilot, who altered course to close the range while maintaining altitude and position to keep the targets on the radar. The navigator plotted the contact's position, course, and speed, then began calculating an intercept solution. The Black Cat shadowed the Japanese formation for over an hour, maintaining a careful distance to avoid detection while continuously updating the target's position. The radar operator could see that the Japanese ships were following a predictable course, making no evasive maneuvers. They clearly had no idea they were being tracked. Meanwhile, the Black Cat's radio operator transmitted encrypted contact reports to the local tactical command center. An American destroyer division, previously positioned based on intelligence estimates of possible Japanese routes, received orders to intercept. The geometry of the situation was elegant. The Japanese destroyers were racing south at 30 knots, following a direct route to their destination. The American destroyers, guided by continuous position updates from the Black Cat, adjusted their course to arrive at an intercept point ahead of the Japanese force. The Black Cat pilot climbed to 10,000 feet, both to improve radar range and to stay well clear of the upcoming engagement. At 0015 hours, the American destroyers made radar contact with the Japanese formation at a range of 18,000 yards. The Japanese, still unaware they had been detected, continued on course. The Americans, positioned in an advantageous attacking position thanks to the Black Cat's guidance, prepared for action. The battle that followed was brief and decisive. The American destroyers, using their own SG surface search radar for fire control, opened fire at a range of 12,000 yards. The Japanese, surprised by the sudden attack from an unexpected direction, attempted to respond, but they had lost the initiative. In the confused action that followed, 2 Japanese destroyers were sunk and a third was heavily damaged. The surviving vessels withdrew at maximum speed, abandoning their supply mission. The Black Cat, still orbiting overhead, tracked the withdrawal and guided American ships in pursuit until the Japanese force moved out of range. The aircraft then returned to base, landing at Munda just after dawn with fuel tanks nearly empty after 9 hours in the air. The crew was exhausted, but they had demonstrated exactly what the Black Cat concept could achieve. Word of the engagement spread quickly through both American and Japanese naval commands. For the Americans, it was validation of the new tactics and technology. A single radar-equipped patrol aircraft had detected an enemy force, maintained contact through hours of tracking, and guided friendly forces to a decisive victory. The Japanese had never had a chance, defeated before they even knew they were in a fight. For the Japanese, the engagement was deeply troubling. Their destroyer captains began reporting that American forces seemed to have an impossible ability to locate and intercept even fast-moving formations operating under ideal conditions for concealment. Some officers speculated that the Americans had broken Japanese codes, allowing them to predict ship movements. Others suggested that coast watchers or local informants were reporting ship departures. The possibility that aircraft equipped with advanced radar were tracking them seemed almost like science fiction, but it was the truth they would have to confront. The Black Cat program expanded rapidly through late 1943 and into 1944. More aircraft were converted to the night patrol configuration. More crews were trained. Tactics were refined based on operational experience. The units developed an increasingly sophisticated understanding of how to employ their unique capabilities. One key refinement was the development of coordinated operations involving multiple aircraft. A single Black Cat could track one target or formation, but multiple aircraft working together could cover larger areas and track multiple targets simultaneously. Patrol sectors were divided and assigned to specific aircraft, creating an interlocking coverage pattern that made it extremely difficult for enemy vessels to transit contested waters undetected. Communication protocols were standardized. Radar operators developed shorthand codes for rapidly transmitting contact information. Pilots learned to coordinate with surface forces, understanding the capabilities and limitations of the destroyers and cruisers they were guiding onto targets. The partnership between air and surface units became increasingly effective as both sides learned to trust and rely on each other. The radar technology itself continued to improve. Engineers made modifications to increase reliability and reduce maintenance requirements. Display systems were enhanced to provide clearer, more easily interpreted presentations. Power systems were upgraded to improve performance. Each incremental improvement made the Black Cats more effective. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was significant and growing. Destroyer captains who had once felt secure operating at night now approached every mission with heightened anxiety. They knew that American aircraft or ships might be tracking them, but they had no way to detect this surveillance. The darkness that had once been their ally now felt like a trap. Some Japanese vessels began attempting evasive tactics, making frequent course changes and varying speed to confuse potential tracking. These measures had limited effectiveness against radar-equipped aircraft that could maintain contact regardless of visual conditions. The course changes simply extended transit times and consumed fuel without providing meaningful protection. Other Japanese units tried operating in larger formations, reasoning that concentrated forces would be better able to defend against attacks. This also proved ineffective. Larger formations were actually easier for Black Cat radar to detect at long range, and American surface forces were willing to engage even numerically superior Japanese units when they had the advantage of surprise and superior positioning provided by airborne coordination. By early 1944, the Black Cats had fundamentally altered the tactical balance in the South Pacific. The Japanese no longer owned the night. American forces, guided by radar-equipped patrol aircraft, could operate as effectively in darkness as in daylight. The Tokyo Express runs that had sustained Japanese garrisons became increasingly costly and eventually unsustainable. Japanese merchant shipping, which had often tried to move under cover of darkness to avoid daytime air attacks, now found night transit just as dangerous. Black Cat patrols detected convoys and guided submarine or surface attacks. The loss rate climbed steadily. Japanese planners were forced to reroute shipping, abandon forward positions, and accept a steadily deteriorating logistical situation. The impact extended beyond simple ship losses. The knowledge that American forces could detect and track vessels at night forced Japanese commanders to be more cautious, more defensive. Aggressive night operations that might have disrupted American plans were abandoned or scaled back. The initiative in night combat had shifted decisively to the Americans. The Black Cat units themselves developed a unique culture and identity. The crews were elite volunteers flying demanding missions in difficult conditions. They spent long hours in the air, much of it tedious patrol work punctuated by brief periods of intense activity when targets were detected. They operated from forward bases that were primitive even by wartime standards, living in tents, eating field rations, and dealing with tropical diseases and the constant threat of Japanese air raids. But they knew their work was making a difference. After each successful mission, after each enemy ship sunk or convoy disrupted, they could see tangible evidence of their contribution to the war effort. The intelligence officers who debriefed them made sure they understood how their reports were being used, how their tracking had enabled victories. This feedback reinforced morale and motivation. The unofficial insignia and nose art on Black Cat aircraft reflected their night hunter role. Stylized black cats with glowing eyes appeared on fuselages. Some crews added tally marks for ships detected or engaged. The aircraft acquired individual names, often playing on the nocturnal theme. Midnight Stalker, Dark Predator, Night Witch, these names captured the essence of what these aircraft and their crews did. They hunted in darkness, using technology to pierce the night and find prey that thought itself hidden. The spring of 1944 brought intensified operations throughout the Pacific theater. American forces were pushing westward, island by island, steadily compressing Japanese defensive perimeters. Each advance required secure sea lanes for supply and reinforcement. Each Japanese stronghold needed to be isolated and starved of resources. The Black Cats played a crucial role in this maritime strangulation. Japanese destroyer captains had become grimly familiar with the pattern. They would depart their bases under cover of darkness, racing toward isolated garrisons that desperately needed supplies and reinforcements. Somewhere along their route, American ships would intercept them with uncanny precision, appearing from directions that suggested prior knowledge of Japanese movements. The engagements were rarely fair fights. The Americans held positional advantage, often achieving surprise, frequently possessing superior numbers at the point of contact. Commander Takeshi Yamamoto had survived 4 such encounters. His destroyer, the Yamakaze, bore scars from near misses and shrapnel damage. 14 of his original crew were dead or invalid ashore. The replacements were young, inexperienced, frightened. Yamamoto himself was exhausted, ground down by the constant strain of operations where death could arrive without warning from the darkness. He understood intellectually that American technology was responsible. Intelligence reports had confirmed that radar-equipped aircraft were tracking Japanese vessels. But understanding the mechanism didn't provide a solution. On the night of March 15, 1944, Yamamoto received orders for another supply run. The destination was Kavieng, a garrison on New Ireland that had been bypassed by American advances and was slowly starving. The Yamakaze would carry ammunition, medicine, and replacement personnel. The mission was critical. It was also likely to be deadly. Yamamoto assembled his crew and briefed them honestly. They would depart at sunset, run at maximum speed through contested waters, deliver their cargo, and withdraw before dawn. American aircraft would probably detect them. American ships might intercept. Every man needed to be alert, ready to fight at any moment. The crew received the briefing in silence. They were professionals, even the young replacements. They knew the odds. They would do their duty regardless. The Yamakaze departed Rabaul at 1830 hours as the sun touched the western horizon. Yamamoto pushed his engines to flank speed immediately, racing to cover as much distance as possible before full darkness fell. His lookouts scanned the sky constantly. Radar or not, perhaps they might spot a circling aircraft, catch some hint of the hunter above them. What Yamamoto didn't know was that a Black Cat from Fleet Air Wing 10 had launched from Amuro Island 90 minutes earlier. The aircraft, piloted by Lieutenant Commander James Hartley, was already on station, orbiting at 7,500 feet over a patrol sector that covered the likely approach routes to Kavieng. Hartley was a veteran pilot with over 200 combat hours in Black Cats. He had flown in the Solomons campaign, participated in the Bismarck Sea engagement, survived 2 emergency landings after mechanical failures. He knew the rhythms of night patrol work, the long stretches of tedium punctuated by sudden action. His radar operator, Chief Petty Officer Robert Chen, had been with him since the program began. Chen had an almost instinctive feel for the radar display, able to distinguish genuine contacts from sea clutter or weather returns with remarkable accuracy. He had personally guided over 30 successful intercepts. Together, Hartley and Chen formed one of the most effective Black Cat teams in the Pacific. At 1925 hours, Chen detected a high-speed contact at 28 miles, bearing 270 degrees, heading approximately 145 degrees. The speed calculation suggested a destroyer or similar warship running at maximum velocity. Chen reported the contact immediately. Hartley acknowledged and began a gentle turn to position for tracking, maintaining altitude and distance. To avoid possible detection, the navigator, Lieutenant David Morrison, began plotting the contact's course and calculating intercept solutions. He worked quickly, marking positions on his chart, checking his calculations twice to ensure accuracy. Within 5 minutes, he had a clear picture. The Japanese vessel was heading directly toward Kavieng on a predictable course. If it maintained current speed and heading, it would arrive at its destination in approximately 3 hours. Morrison transmitted this information to the Tactical Operations Center at Amuro. The duty officer there consulted his status boards. An American destroyer division, 3 ships under Commander William Reynolds, was currently patrolling northwest of Kavieng. The geometry was favorable. Reynolds received encrypted orders to proceed to a specified intercept point at best speed. Meanwhile, Hartley kept his Black Cat in position, shadowing the Japanese destroyer from a careful distance. Chen provided updates every 5 minutes, tracking any course or speed changes. The Yamakaze continued on its direct route, making no evasive maneuvers. Either Yamamoto didn't know he was being tracked, or he had decided that speed was his best defense and was simply racing to complete his mission before interception became possible. Commander Reynolds pushed his 3 destroyers hard, working up to 32 knots as they raced to reach the intercept point. His ships were well-trained and well-equipped. Each mounted the latest SG surface search radar and Mark 37 fire control systems. His crews had fought multiple night engagements and knew their business. But they also knew they were facing professionals. Japanese destroyer crews were skilled and aggressive. If this turned into a close-range brawl, it could go either way. The advantage Reynolds possessed was information. The Black Cat had provided precise initial contact data and was continuing to update the target's position every few minutes. Reynolds could position his ships optimally, choosing his engagement range and angle of attack. The Japanese commander would be reacting to surprise, fighting from disadvantage. At 2,140 hours, Reynolds's lead destroyer made radar contact with the Yamakaze at 19,000 yards. The geometry was exactly as planned. The American ships were positioned ahead and to the starboard side of the Japanese destroyer, able to cross its bow and bring all guns to bear. Reynolds held fire, allowing the range to close. He wanted to ensure the first salvo would be devastating. Aboard the Yamakaze, Yamamoto had no warning until the first American salvo lit the darkness with muzzle flashes. The shells arrived seconds later, straddling his ship, throwing up towering columns of water that drenched his deck. Yamamoto reacted instantly, ordering hard rudder and emergency acceleration, but his options were limited. The American ships had positioned themselves perfectly. Every turn he made exposed his ship to concentrated fire. He ordered his own guns to return fire, but the American destroyers were harder to see, their positions revealed only by muzzle flashes that appeared and disappeared in the darkness. His gunners fired at those flashes, but accuracy was poor. The Americans, guided by radar, were placing shells with disturbing precision. The engagement lasted 17 minutes. The Yamakaze took multiple hits. A 5-inch shell penetrated the engine room, causing catastrophic damage. Another struck the bridge, killing 3 officers and wounding Yamamoto. Fire broke out amidships. The destroyer began losing way, its speed dropping rapidly as the damaged engines failed. Yamamoto, bleeding from shrapnel wounds, gave the order to abandon ship. His crew began launching life rafts and helping the wounded into the water. The American destroyers ceased fire once it became clear the Yamakaze was no longer a threat. Reynolds directed his ships to illuminate the area with searchlights and lower boats to rescue survivors. This was standard procedure when tactical circumstances permitted. Japanese sailors in the water were collected and brought aboard American ships as prisoners of war. Yamamoto was among the survivors. He was taken to the sick bay of Reynolds's flagship, where a Navy corpsman treated his wounds. Later, after he had recovered sufficiently, he was interviewed by intelligence officers. They were professional and courteous, treating him according to the rules of war. During one of these interviews, Yamamoto asked the question that had haunted him since the battle. How had the American ships known exactly where to find him? The intelligence officer considered the question, then decided there was no harm in answering. He explained about the radar-equipped patrol aircraft, the continuous tracking, the precise coordination between air and surface units. Yamamoto listened in silence, his face expressionless. Finally, he nodded slowly. He had suspected something of the sort, but hearing confirmation was still sobering. The Americans possessed technology that fundamentally changed naval warfare. Japanese forces were fighting an enemy who could see in the dark. Similar scenes played out across the Pacific throughout 1944. Black Cat aircraft detected Japanese vessels, tracked them through hours of darkness, and guided American forces to intercept. Destroyer after destroyer was sunk or damaged. Supply runs failed. Isolated garrisons received no reinforcement. The Imperial Japanese Navy's ability to conduct surface operations shrank steadily as losses mounted. The Japanese did attempt countermeasures. Some vessels were equipped with primitive radar detectors that could alert crews when they were being tracked by radar emissions. This provided warning but no real solution. Knowing you were being tracked didn't help if you couldn't see the tracker or effectively evade guided pursuers. Other Japanese ships tried operating in larger formations, reasoning that massed forces would be more defensible. This proved counterproductive. Larger formations were easier to detect at long range and simply provided more targets when American forces attacked. Some Japanese commanders attempted to operate in weather conditions they hoped would interfere with radar. They would sail during storms or heavy rain, gambling that the radar returns would be obscured by weather clutter. This occasionally worked, but it also made navigation more difficult and dangerous. Ships were lost to groundings or collisions, achieving nothing. By mid-1944, Japanese surface forces in the South and Central Pacific had been reduced to shadows of their former strength. The destroyers and cruisers that had dominated night combat in 1942 were gone, sunk or so heavily damaged they were withdrawn for repair. Replacement vessels arrived slowly, and their crews lacked the experience and training of the veterans they replaced. The Black Cat program continued expanding. More aircraft were converted, more crews trained, more forward bases established. The operational tempo was intense. Aircraft flew night after night, logging hundreds of hours, detecting and tracking countless contacts. Some nights produced multiple engagements. Other nights were quiet, long patrols that detected nothing but provided valuable reconnaissance data about areas where enemy forces were not operating. The intelligence gathered by Black Cat patrols proved valuable beyond simple target detection. The patterns of Japanese ship movements revealed their supply routes, their operational priorities, their defensive concerns. Analysts could track the decline in Japanese naval activity, noting the reduced frequency of supply runs, the smaller size of task forces, the increasingly desperate nature of Japanese operations. This intelligence informed strategic planning. American commanders knew which Japanese positions were being supplied and which were being allowed to wither. They could identify Japanese priorities by observing where ships were being risked despite heavy losses. They could plan their own operations with confidence that Japanese surface forces no longer posed a significant threat to American sea control. The psychological warfare aspect of the Black Cat operations was also significant. Japanese sailors and officers knew they were being hunted by invisible aircraft equipped with technology they couldn't counter. This knowledge was corrosive to morale. Men who had once eagerly volunteered for destroyer duty now approached such assignments with dread. The casualty rates spoke for themselves. American propaganda exploited this fear, distributing leaflets and radio broadcasts that emphasized the futility of Japanese naval operations. The messages were factual rather than bombastic, simply pointing out the loss rates, the failed supply missions, the steady attrition of Japanese strength. For Japanese sailors who had survived multiple engagements, these messages resonated with their lived experience. The summer of 1944 brought the climactic naval battles of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf. These massive carrier engagements involved hundreds of aircraft and dozens of capital ships. The Black Cats played supporting roles in these battles, conducting reconnaissance, tracking damaged vessels, guiding rescue operations. But their primary contribution continued to be the steady, unglamorous work of night patrol and interdiction. While carrier battles captured headlines and shaped strategic outcomes, the Black Cats were strangling Japanese logistics and mobility. Every supply ship detected and sunk meant troops without ammunition, without food, without hope of reinforcement. Every destroyer lost to night interception meant one fewer escort for convoys, one less vessel available for fleet operations. The cumulative effect was devastating. By autumn 1944, the Black Cat program had settled into efficient routine. Operational procedures were standardized across units. Maintenance practices had been refined to maximize aircraft availability. Crew training had been systematized, producing a steady flow of qualified personnel. The program had evolved from an experimental concept to a mature, reliable operational capability. Individual crews had become extraordinarily proficient. Pilots could hold precise stations for hours in complete darkness, maintaining exact altitude and position through instrument flying alone. Radar operators could distinguish between vessel types by the characteristics of radar returns, identifying destroyers versus cruisers versus cargo ships without visual confirmation. Navigators could dead reckon across hundreds of miles of open ocean and arrive at specified coordinates within minutes of predicted times. The partnership between Black Cat aircraft and surface forces had also matured. Destroyer and cruiser commanders trusted the information provided by circling aircraft. They had learned to interpret the contact reports, understand the coordinate systems, and execute intercepts with smooth precision. The radio communications between air and surface units had become almost telepathic in their efficiency, with minimal transmissions conveying maximum information. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell had joined the Black Cat program in early 1944 as one of the first female radar operators assigned to the Pacific Theater. The Navy had initially resisted using women in combat zones, but the demand for skilled radar operators and the proven abilities of female technicians in training roles had gradually overcome institutional resistance. Mitchell had demonstrated exceptional aptitude in radar school, outperforming most of her male classmates. She had a gift for pattern recognition and an ability to maintain focus through long periods of routine monitoring. Her instructors had recommended her for operational assignment, and after additional training, she had been posted to Fleet Air Wing 4. Her presence in an operational unit had initially caused some awkwardness. The male crew members hadn't known quite how to interact with a female colleague in the close confines of an aircraft operating in combat conditions. But Mitchell had made it clear from the start that she expected to be treated as a professional operator, no different from any male radar technician. She did her job, did it well, and gradually earned the respect and acceptance of her crew. On the night of October 3, 1944, Mitchell was operating the radar aboard a Black Cat piloted by Lieutenant Commander Thomas Bradford. They were conducting a routine patrol off the coast of Mindanao, monitoring sea lanes that Japanese forces occasionally used for inter-island transport. The patrol had been quiet for the first 4 hours, detecting only a few small coastal vessels of no tactical significance. At 0220 hours, Mitchell detected multiple contacts at extreme range, over 35 miles distant. The returns were faint but distinct, showing at least 4 separate vessels in close formation, moving at moderate speed on a northwesterly heading. She reported the contact to Bradford, who acknowledged and began a slow turn to close the range while maintaining altitude. Mitchell continued tracking the contacts, refining her estimates of their number, formation, and speed. As range decreased and returns strengthened, she determined there were actually 6 vessels. 4 appeared to be medium-sized, possibly destroyers or small cargo ships. 2 were larger, potentially cruisers or large transports. Bradford contacted the Tactical Operations Center and reported the contact. The duty officer there checked available assets. An American cruiser force under Rear Admiral Marcus Foster was operating in the general area, but it was over 100 miles from the contact location. Foster's force could intercept, but it would take several hours to get into position. Bradford received orders to maintain contact and provide continuous tracking. He acknowledged and settled into the patient work of shadowing the Japanese formation. Mitchell kept her eyes on the radar display, updating positions every 3 minutes, noting any changes in course or speed. The Japanese ships maintained a steady course, apparently unaware they were being tracked. Over the next 2 hours, Bradford carefully managed his fuel consumption while keeping the targets on radar. Mitchell's reports allowed Foster's cruiser force to plot an optimal intercept course. The American ships increased speed to close the distance, racing through the darkness toward coordinates that were being continuously updated by the Black Cat overhead. At 0445 hours, Foster's cruisers made radar contact with the Japanese formation at 23,000 yards. The American force had achieved perfect positioning, crossing ahead of the Japanese ships and preparing to deliver a devastating broadside. Bradford took his Black Cat higher and positioned well clear of the engagement area. The battle began at 0502 hours when Foster's cruisers opened fire. The Japanese force attempted to respond, but they were caught completely by surprise, their formation scattered, their situational awareness poor. American fire control radar guided salvos onto targets with methodical precision. Within 20 minutes, 3 Japanese vessels were sinking or heavily damaged. The survivors attempted to withdraw, laying smoke and making evasive maneuvers. Foster pursued, continuing to pound the fleeing ships with accurate fire. Bradford's Black Cat tracked the entire engagement, providing Foster with positions of the withdrawing Japanese vessels and ensuring no targets escaped in the darkness and confusion. By 0600 hours, as dawn began to light the eastern horizon, the engagement was over. 5 Japanese vessels had been sunk. 1 damaged ship was limping away but would likely be caught and finished off by aircraft after sunrise. Foster's cruisers were undamaged, having fought the entire action at ranges where Japanese return fire was ineffective. Bradford turned his Black Cat toward home base, Mitchell securing her radar equipment and preparing her contact report. They had been airborne for 9 hours, most of it routine patrol work. But the 2 hours spent tracking the Japanese formation and guiding the intercept represented exactly what the Black Cat program was designed to accomplish. Mitchell wrote her report carefully, documenting contact times, positions, courses, and speeds with meticulous precision. This data would be analyzed by intelligence officers, incorporated into assessments of Japanese shipping patterns, and used to refine patrol sectors and intercept procedures. Her work, like the work of hundreds of other radar operators throughout the Pacific, was building an increasingly detailed picture of Japanese naval movements and capabilities. By late 1944, the strategic situation in the Pacific had shifted decisively. American forces were advancing on multiple fronts. The Philippines were being liberated. American submarines and aircraft were decimating Japanese merchant shipping. The combined fleet, once the most powerful naval force in the Pacific, had been shattered in the Great Carrier Battles. Surface forces that survived were increasingly bottled up in home waters or remote anchorages, unable to operate effectively against American dominance. The Black Cats continued their work, but the nature of their missions evolved. There were fewer Japanese destroyers to hunt, fewer supply runs to intercept. Instead, the aircraft increasingly focused on reconnaissance, monitoring Japanese harbors, tracking the movements of surviving warships, searching for submarines and potential kamikaze staging areas. The missions were less dramatic but still valuable, providing intelligence that informed operational planning and strategic decisions. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.